The 20-hour hostage drama in southern Tasmania is over.
The Port Arthur Massacre is one of Australia's greatest tragedies, an unfathomable loss of life that led to sweeping gun control changes across the country.
April 28, 1996, started as a peaceful Sunday, but it would end as Australia's deadliest mass shooting in history. Stay tuned as we uncover how a disturbed young man with a childhood fascination for violence turned a historic site into a killing field that would change an entire nation forever. Martin Bryant was born on May 7, 1967, in Hobart, Tasmania, to parents Maurice and Carleen Bryant. From the very beginning, it was clear that something was different about Martin. As a child, he displayed disturbing behavioral problems that terrified even his own family. His father, Maurice, would later tell a psychiatrist that Martin had been difficult since the day he was born, prone to violent tantrums and completely unable to empathize with others. By the time Martin started school, his odd behavior had already isolated him from his peers. He had an IQ of 66, which placed him in the extremely low range of intelligence, yet his parents refused to have him enrolled in special education programs. They wanted Martin to have a normal life, but this decision would prove catastrophic. Other children avoided him, teachers struggled to control him, and Martin grew up without a single friend to his name. As Martin grew older, his behavior became increasingly disturbing. He tortured animals for fun, about shooting people and describing in graphic detail how he would kill them. He collected violent videos and watched them repeatedly, seeming to derive pleasure from scenes of death and destruction. His father, Maurice, became so concerned that he told a psychiatrist his son was someone to be frightened of, someone who might one day do something terrible. Despite these warning signs, Martin was never properly treated or institutionalized. He drifted through life without purpose, without friends, and without any real supervision. The only structure in his life came from his father, who tried desperately to keep his son occupied and out of trouble. But in 1993, tragedy struck when Maurice Bryant drowned in a diving accident. Many suspected that Martin had something to do with his father's death, though nothing was ever proven. After his father's death, Martin inherited the family home and a modest sum of money. But his life took an even stranger turn when he befriended a reclusive heiress named Helen Harvey, a woman 35 years his senior. Helen had inherited a fortune from her family, and for reasons that baffled everyone who knew her, she took Martin under her wing. They became inseparable, with Martin moving into her mansion and the two of them traveling. Neighbors found their relationship bizarre and unsettling. Martin, who had never had a friend in his life, was now living with a wealthy older woman who seemed to enable his worst impulses. She bought him whatever he wanted, including guns. Lots of guns. Martin developed an obsession with firearms, amassing a collection that included semi-automatic rifles and pistols. He would spend hours at shooting ranges, perfecting his aim and talking about how guns gave him power. In 1992, Helen Harvey died in a car accident while Martin was driving. Once again, suspicion swirled around Martin, but no charges were ever filed. What was undeniable was that Martin inherited Helen's entire estate, worth over $500,000. At 25 years old, with no education, no job skills, and severe mental disabilities, Martin Bryant was suddenly a wealthy man with unlimited free time and access to an arsenal of weapons. With his newfound wealth, Martin's behavior became even more erratic. He would drive around in Helen's BMW, acting out power fantasies and treating people with contempt. He traveled overseas, visiting historical sites of massacres and collecting Nazi memorabilia. He told people he was going to do something that would make everyone remember his name. But nobody took him seriously, After all, he was just the weird, slow guy that everyone had known since childhood. By early 1996, Martin had become increasingly isolated and angry. He felt rejected by society, mocked by everyone he encountered, and consumed by rage. He began planning something that would satisfy his darkest fantasies, something that would give him the recognition he desperately craved.
It's a character that I think we've all kind of witnessed and seen from afar. You know, it's someone that definitely has sort of fallen between the cracks.
Stop it! Get in the car!
And I think the film sort of focuses on, you know, what happens when, you know, an individual like that suddenly kind of, you know, comes face to face with a kind of gun culture and how dangerous, you know, that can be.
Disturbing and uncomfortable, the film Nitram depicts the events leading up to the worst mass shooting in modern Australian history, Port Arthur.
Stop!
The film avoids the massacre itself and focuses on the murderer before his rampage at the historic site. Port Arthur prompted major gun reform across the country, and director Justin Kurzel says it was that message that made him want to take on the screenplay.
It became very obvious very quickly that it was, you know, it was an anti-gun film, but that it was incredibly powerful in the way in which it played out the, I guess, the sort of steps in which someone started making incredibly bad choices and found themselves in a position where they were, you know, buying the most horrific, you know, guns.
He started stockpiling ammunition, purchasing thousands of rounds for his rifles. He studied the layouts of popular tourist locations, timing how long it would take police to respond to an emergency. On April 28, 1996, Martin loaded his car with 3 rifles, ammunition magazines, and a change of clothes. He drove to Port Arthur, a historic former penal colony that had become one of Tasmania's most visited tourist attractions. It was a beautiful autumn day, and the site was crowded with families enjoying the sunshine and exploring the ruins. Martin arrived around noon, carrying a large sports bag containing his weapons. He started his rampage at the Broad Arrow Cafe, a popular restaurant overlooking the harbor. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Martin removed a Colt AR-15 semi-automatic rifle from his bag and began firing. His first victim was a woman having lunch with her partner. She died instantly. Then he turned and fired at other diners in rapid succession. The cafe erupted into chaos as people scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to hide. In less than 90 seconds, Martin fired 29 shots, killing 20 people and wounding 12 others in the cafe alone. His shooting was methodical and precise, moving from target to target with deadly efficiency. Those who survived recalled the eerie silence between shots, broken only by the sound of Martin's footsteps as he walked between tables, executing wounded victims with shots to the head. After emptying the cafe, Martin calmly walked outside and continued shooting people in the parking area. He killed 4 more people as they tried to flee to their cars. A mother and her 2 young daughters, aged 3 and 6, were shot as they hid behind a tree. The mother threw herself over her children, but Martin shot through her body to kill the girls beneath. When a man tried to help them, Martin shot him 4 times. Martin then got into his car and drove toward the historic site's tow booth, shooting at people as he drove. He stopped at a service station where he shot and killed a woman and her partner. He stole their BMW, forcing a male hostage into the vehicle at gunpoint. As he drove away, he shot at passing cars, killing more innocent people
who had simply been enjoying a Sunday drive through the countryside. The rampage continued as Martin drove to a nearby guest house called Seascape, a property he had tried to buy years earlier but had been outbid. Unknown to police at the time, Martin had already killed the property's owners, David and Nolene Martin, earlier that morning before heading to Port Arthur. He had tied them up and shot them execution style because they had prevented him from buying the property he wanted. When police finally arrived at Seascape, after tracking Martin's movements, a 19-hour standoff ensued. Martin held his hostage inside the building, while hundreds of police officers surrounded the property. He fired hundreds of rounds at police, preventing them from approaching. The standoff was broadcast live on television, with the entire nation watching in horror as the death toll continued to rise. Throughout the night, Martin set fire to the guest house, using furniture and gasoline to create an inferno. At some point during the siege, he shot and killed his hostage, though the exact timing remains unclear. As dawn broke on April 29th, the building was fully engulfed in flames. Martin, suffering from severe burns, finally emerged from the burning structure and was immediately taken into custody. When the smoke cleared and investigators began the grim task of counting bodies, the full horror of Martin Bryant's rampage became apparent. In less than 24 hours, he had murdered 35 people and wounded 23 others. Victims ranged in age from 3 to 72 years old. They included tourists from around the world, local residents, and entire families wiped out in seconds. It was the worst mass shooting in Australian history and remains one of the deadliest shooting sprees by a single person worldwide. The nation was in shock. How could one man cause so much death and destruction? How had someone with Martin's history of violence and mental illness been allowed to accumulate such a deadly arsenal? The questions demanded answers, and the Australian government acted swiftly. Martin Bryant was charged with 35 counts of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. During his interrogation, he initially denied everything, claiming he had been selling surfboards at the time of the shootings. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses identified him, his fingerprints were found on weapons and ammunition at the scene,
and he had been captured on security cameras. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Martin's lawyers advised him to plead guilty to avoid a trial that would further traumatize survivors and victims' families. On November 7, 1996, Martin Bryant pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 35 life sentences plus 1,035 years without the possibility of parole. The judge stated that Martin should never be released and should spend the rest of his life in prison.
The gunman's name?
I have absolutely no intentions of going to see the film. Every time we talk about Port Arthur, it raises the hairs on the back of your neck.
These days, Colin Riley heads the state's police union. 25 years ago, he was part of the police team at Port Arthur.
It's just one of those things that it is a bookmark in your life.
Hundreds of police officers and their families were affected by Port Arthur, and Colin Riley says many are re-traumatised when it's brought up.
So anything like this does cause anxiety for our members and ex-members. It would be good to get to a point where the attraction to Port Arthur evaporates and there isn't a desire to keep talking about it and move on. And I think it's a generational thing.
I think there are those that are going to feel as though no film should ever be made about this subject matter. But, you know, I believe in its message.
The Port Arthur Massacre had a profound and immediate impact on Australian society. Just 12 days after the shooting, Australian Prime Minister John Howard announced sweeping gun control reforms. The National Firearms Agreement was implemented, introducing strict gun ownership regulations, a ban on semi-automatic and automatic weapons, and a massive gun buyback program that removed over 650,000 firearms from circulation.
The reforms were not without controversy, with gun rights advocates arguing against what they saw as government overreach. But the overwhelming majority of Australians supported the changes, traumatized by the massacre and determined to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. In the years since, Australia has not experienced a single mass shooting on the scale of Port Arthur, a stark contrast to other developed nations that have faced repeated massacres. For the survivors and victims' families, the trauma never truly ended. Many suffered from severe PTSD, unable to return to normal life after witnessing such horror. Some committed suicide in the years following the massacre, unable to cope with their memories. The Port Arthur Historic Site closed for months after the shooting, and when it reopened, the Broad Arrow Cafe remained sealed as a memorial to those who died there. To this day, visitors can see the building but cannot enter, a permanent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded within its walls. Martin Bryant remains imprisoned at Risdon Prison in Tasmania, held in a special unit for his own protection. Other inmates have attacked him multiple times over the years, viewing him with the same disgust as the rest of society. He has shown no remorse for his actions, displaying the same lack of empathy that characterized his entire life. Prison psychiatrists have described him as a psychopath who still fantasizes about the power he felt during his rampage. In 2021, Bryant was assessed by a tribunal to determine if he was fit for release. Psychiatric reports revealed that he had gained significant weight, suffered from various health problems, and showed signs of cognitive decline. But more disturbingly, the reports noted that he remained a danger to society, still unable to comprehend the enormity of his crimes or feel genuine remorse for the 35 lives he had destroyed. The tribunal unanimously denied his release, ensuring he will die behind bars. The Port Arthur Massacre stands as a turning point in Australian history, a day that divided the nation into before and after. The 35 victims are remembered not just as statistics, but as mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, friends and loved ones,
whose lives were stolen by a man consumed by rage and enabled by a society that failed to recognize the danger he posed. The memorial at Port Arthur bears the names of all 35 victims, a place where survivors and family members still gather each year on April 28th to remember those they lost. The historic site, once associated only with Australia's convict past, now carries the additional burden of being forever linked to the nation's deadliest peacetime massacre. What do you think could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Should Martin Bryant's warning signs have been taken more seriously by authorities and mental health professionals? Were Australia's gun control reforms the right response, or should other measures have been considered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. See you in the next one.